Richard Hawkes. I'm the Chief Executive of the British Asian Trust. I'm really pleased to be welcoming you to another of our BAT Insights, our programme of exclusive high-level webinars for our supporters. And I'm absolutely delighted that our guest today is Lord Tariq Ahmad of Wimbledon, UK Government Minister for South Asia and the Commonwealth, and a very good friend of the British Asian Trust, this being the third event this year that he's joined us for, following our royal dinner in February and our virtual iftar event that we had in May, just after the lockdown started. This is an exclusive opportunity to gain insight from Lord Ahmad, especially about the new Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office that came into existence last week, following the coming together of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office with the Department for International Development. Lord Ahmad's also going to focus on wider South Asian current affairs and issues following his recent virtual tours to different countries in the region, especially India a few weeks ago and Pakistan, I think just 2 days ago. You all know the British Asian Trust and you know how important our work is across South Asia. And that is true now more than ever. The COVID situation is getting worse across the world, and in South Asia it's clear that the coming months are going to be absolutely critical. The situation, especially in India, has been getting increasingly difficult, with India now the second highest in the world with regards to the numbers of cases. Across the region, this is having a devastating impact on health and also on the economy. For the British Asian Trust, we've been refocusing our programs to focus on immediate needs and also on the issues that are going to be crucial as we rebuild in the months ahead. In 10 years, we've been able to change the lives in a positive way of more than 4 million people. But we know that in the years ahead, we have to keep this number increasing. We'll be able to do this because we are extremely fortunate to have an amazing group of supporters, trustees, advisors, founder circle members, and ambassadors. One of those ambassadors is our great friend Sonali Shah, a BBC TV presenter and a long-standing supporter and ambassador of the Trust. Sonali began her professional broadcasting career in BBC Radio back in about 2001. She produced and presented news and business programmes on the World Service and BBC Radio 5 Live before moving on to our TV screens as a presenter of Newsround. She's covered many live events for the BBC, including the Queen's 90th birthday. She joined the Crime Watch team in 2015, and as all of us in the UK know, she currently presents Escape to the Country. Before I hand over to Sonali to facilitate this discussion, please allow me to just point out a few things. We've had some great questions come in already ahead of this session, which Sonali will be asking. But if you do wish to ask questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A box, and we'll make sure my colleagues will pass them on to Sonali, and time permitting, we'll get to them. This event is being recorded because we've got a number of supporters who've asked us if it would be possible to do that and send it to them afterwards. So it is being recorded, which I hope is okay. I hope all that's clear, and without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Sonali Shah.
Richard, thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to be hosting today's webinar. So a very warm welcome to all of you from me. I've been an ambassador of the Trust for nearly a decade now, and at the time I got involved because of their work in educating girls in South Asia. That really was my focus at the time. I was hosting Newsround, a children's news show at the time. All these years later, I am so proud of the work that they did in that arena and still do, but also in helping people access jobs, set up businesses in anti-trafficking, and supporting those with mental health needs. And I'm really a proud ambassador of the Trust. But that's enough from me, because you're not here to hear from me, you're here to hear from Lord Ahmad. So let's get this discussion going. Welcome, Lord Ahmad. I know you wanted to say a few words before I threw lots of questions at you.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to connect with you, albeit virtually, Sonali, and indeed, thank you, Richard, for inviting me to this session. It's great to meet up with the British Asian Trust family once again. As we were saying just before we came on the air, I remember my last event with the BAT was the virtual iftar in May, when I had an opportunity to extend to many members of the British Asian community and beyond who were celebrating and going through what was a very difficult and challenging and different Ramadan as well. But I pay tribute to many, not just from the British Muslim community, but from all communities who've shown both great resilience, but also great principle in playing their part in helping us all to stay safe from the current pandemic that engulfs us all. And in this regard, I want to reiterate once again what I've said time and time again. I'm very proud being part of the British Asian diaspora to reflect, when we look at the challenges of the pandemic, of the incredible role that people in the front line from the British Asian community have played, whether we're talking about nurses, doctors, or other people in public life and beyond. The incredible and unprecedented service they've given during the pandemic, notwithstanding the fact that often are putting their own lives at risk. Where we've seen how doctors and nurses have met front on the challenge, key workers in shops, community leaders. And I pay tribute particularly to various faith leaders as well, who have shown great leadership in ensuring that the places of worship at times of challenge, we've been through various religious festivals, but people have sustained a real discipline. And whilst we all thrive to get out to meet family and friends, particularly during religious festivities, everyone has shown great discipline, and our leaders within the community, who are often challenged by things that are thrown their way from society, have played a very pivotal role. I also, if I may, commend the British Asian Trust for all the work you're doing. Sonali, you mentioned about your inspiration when you first joined as an ambassador, and I'm proud that through the BAT and the support that the UK government gives, we continue to focus on many of those precious principles and ideals and programs that made you first really take up the mantle and be an ambassador, which is in support of education, particularly of young girls around the world, particularly from South Asia, who still do not have the opportunity to get that basic level of education, which empowers them, their families, and their communities. And I also pay tribute to the BAT for the support you're giving to those most vulnerable communities through your emergency appeal to raise funds for people in India, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. And let me assure you that as the minister responsible for South Asia, we continue to work with organizations like yourselves, multilateral agencies such as the UN, and directly with countries in South Asia to address the current challenges of the pandemic. Now, it was mentioned right at the beginning that I join you as a new minister, not a new minister per se. I've been a minister for a while now, but a new minister to the new department, which is the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And we feel very strongly, as does our Prime Minister, and he's very much led on this new merged department, about uniting our efforts when it comes to issues of development with diplomacy in one single department. And I'm sure we will have discussions in that respect. So with that, Sonali, I'm delighted to join you for this discussion and indeed our wider audience. And I look forward to our exchanges this afternoon.
You've hinted, Lord Ahmed, at how many roles you have. You haven't mentioned them all yet. Let's begin with being Minister of State for South Asia and the Commonwealth. Tell us a little bit about your position there.
Well, you won't get any prizes for guessing that my own heritage is from South Asia. My mother and father, my mother was born in Jodhpur in India, and my father was born in Gurdaspur in India. My father then, very quickly when the partition happened, traveled to Scotland, and our first family home was in Glasgow. But as perhaps you can detect from those investigative journalists amongst you, my accent isn't quite Glaswegian. But my mother, she went over to Karachi. She taught in Karachi before they married in the early 60s and set up home first in Scotland and then back in London in the early 60s. My own family as well, my wife, Sadiqa, was born in Pakistan, but grew up in Australia. So as Minister for South Asia, we have a kind of rich heritage in itself intertwined with another element of my role, which is as Minister for the Commonwealth. But leading the agenda when it comes to our exchange with South Asia, I think is particularly both I'm proud to do and honoured to do, because you look at the strength of the British Asian diaspora, the communities that constitute modern Britain today, the relationships we have, the people-to-people links within the context of the Commonwealth. And I've been really fortunate, most recently, again, through virtual visits which we all lived through, to have visited India, Nepal, and Pakistan most recently. We've also had incredible exchanges with Bangladesh, meeting the challenge full on. We've had discussions around the pandemic, the role countries can play collaboratively, but equally, I've gained great insight into the challenges those countries are facing, but also importantly, how we, through the strength of our diaspora communities, of which the BAT is a vital link, we can actually do so much more. So I'm looking forward to working on some bilateral programs, both within the context of the Commonwealth, as well as strengthening our relations with each country, but on those particular issues that matter to us all, be it climate change, tackling poverty, girls' education, issues of prosperity, increasing trade, and another area of my responsibility, which is challenging, but I also feel very honoured to lead, which is as the UK's Minister for Human Rights. And there are many challenges that countries in South Asia face, which I believe from our own learning and experiences we can assist with.
How would you assess the UK's current relationship with South Asia?
Well, I think it's based on and steeped in history for obvious reasons, but at the same time, there is huge opportunity. The greatest strength of the relationship is what I've already mentioned, which is our people-to-people link. It provides a great strength, the connectivity between the two countries, the fact that many of us have families and friends who still reside across South Asia. And I think that provides a huge opportunity and quite a unique opportunity in terms of what more we can do. If I may also reflect, when you look at the current British government, I mean, I put it to anyone on this call, and I put it to myself even, 25 years ago, would we have seriously thought that we would have a centre-right conservative government, which would have the names of Sunak, Patel, Sharma, Ahmed, and others, constituting and reflecting the real leadership within British government? But that's not limited just to government. Sonali, you yourself are an example within journalism, but every single profession, I would argue. Today, the modern United Kingdom reflects the strength of the relationship we have through heritage links with South Asia. And therein lies the opportunity of us being able to do so much more on many of the themes I've already mentioned.
And you also represent the UK to the UN, don't you?
I do. I'm the Minister for the United Nations, and I think within the UN, as many will know, the United Kingdom remains one of the founding members. It's a member of what's called the P5, the permanent 5 members of the Security Council. And we have a very pivotal and central role at the UN in terms of particular issues of security and conflict resolution. And for example, this week, we're already planning for later this month, which is normally referred to as an acronym, UNGA, the UN General Assembly, but it's the high level week. Whereas I'm sure many people joining us today recall, where leaders from all over the world during September travel to New York as part of what's known as High Level Week to present their interventions, to meet, to exchange, have discussions, and indeed agree ways forward with each other and collectively. This year, like any other institution, the UN is doing it virtually. So we're planning our virtual program for High Level Week. We are focused on important issues such as the COVID-19 pandemic. We're also looking at important issues at the planning for the big environmental UN conference, which will be hosted in Glasgow next year in the UK, by the UK, called COP26, and working also in support of the incredible support we do in the development sphere for developing parts of the world to ensure not only they meet the challenges of climate change, but we're also able, notwithstanding the pandemic, to continue to support them as they meet the challenges which are caused by human suffering, those of poverty alleviation, ensuring that famine doesn't grip parts of the world, and that we continue to play our pivotal and central role in helping other countries build back better, greener, and in a more resilient way after we've moved out of this stage of the pandemic.
Lord Ahmed, we've already had one message and question in actually about the headline news from your department that Richard and you have both mentioned. It's from Arif, who says, congratulations for the First Minister of South Asia and the Commonwealth. This merger, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office merging with DFID, the Department for International Development, I don't think that the joining together itself was a huge surprise, but it did bring some concerns that Britain may look inward at a time when the world is facing such a huge health and economic crisis. How will the change in this new department, the FCDO, affect foreign aid? I think that's a concern, and that's a concern from Arif, who's saying, you know, funding has been slashed. This is his question. What's the best way to support Pakistan in this change scenario?
Sure. Well, thank you, Arif. Thank you, Sonali. I mean, first of all, I understand that concern, but I just correct the premise of the question from Arif, that funding hasn't been slashed. We're still very much committed to the, which is enshrined in law, to the 0.7% of our gross national income, which is the basis on which we assess our what's called overseas development assistance. What has happened because of the pandemic, and we're all aware of that, the UK has been in lockdown. We are no different to other countries. Our economy has suffered, which means that the base, the GNI, on which the 0.7% is based, has become a smaller base. And that's resulted in us having to make certain cuts in certain areas. But I assure you, as we've been doing that, and I'll come on to the merger in a moment, we've kept those very principles of poverty alleviation, relieving the plight of human suffering, very much at the heart and center of the work we do, as we did across two departments, and now as we do with the FCDO. On the uniting of the two departments, what does it do? Well, I'll just take you a step back. I remember when Boris Johnson was Foreign Secretary. I served as one of his ministers at that time. And I, like him, was at times frustrated. You could be in country, I won't name names just now in any way, but where perhaps our approach through our own network was not as together as it could be. So I would perhaps be going in with my hat as a human rights minister, calling out human rights violations, the lack of opportunity and access for young girls, or calling out the suppression of minority religious beliefs in a particular country. Yet at the same time, we were supporting development programs without actually joining the two together. So for example, within education programs, RFR specifically about Pakistan, I was in virtually Pakistan a couple of days ago, and I reiterated my commitment to the importance of girls' education. But 12 years, as the Prime Minister has called it, quality education. That means I believe, and I believe very passionately about this, that as we look towards supporting vulnerable communities around the world, including in South Asia and places such as Pakistan and Bangladesh, that we do so with a qualitative assessment of who's actually doing the teaching, what is actually being taught, to make sure that these are consistent with the real principles of equality of access, equality of opportunity, and ensuring that what's being taught is reflective of our own values agenda. So I think it will further strengthen our development hand as we bring together the strands of our diplomatic network, together with us being a major world power when it comes to development, and that will continue. And our commitment to the 0.7% remains very much alive.
You've mentioned girls' education there. Is that one of the FCDO's priorities in South Asia? What else is a priority? As you say, GDP is down across the world. There will have to be priorities, and there will have to be certain things that do fall by the wayside.
No, undoubtedly, and you know, like with any programs, you recognize that. But the short answer to your first question is yes. The Prime Minister, if I was to quote and talk about Boris Johnson in any way, this is one of his fundamental mantras about standing up for girls' education. I remember private conversations with the then Foreign Secretary, now Prime Minister, where he used to talk with great passion about the need that if you educated a young girl, you not only helped her and helped her family, you would then actually empower her, as well as her local community, and ultimately a country, and then globally, by actually releasing this incredible potential of young girls who actually realize their ambitions, aspirations. But the fact is, the challenge remains a live one. I mentioned about being in Pakistan a couple of days ago. I went to a school which I visited virtually, and I share with you one particular story of a young girl I met there. And she aspired to be a doctor now, which was great. Here was a girl who'd been taught some of the fundamentals. She was moving from primary to the next level of education. But I asked her right after she talked me through her story, I said, what was the biggest challenge you found? What was the biggest hurdle you had to overcome to allow you to have these dreams and realize through education the journey you're now undertaking? And she went and became quite serious for a moment and emotional and said, my parents. She said, the biggest block to my early learning was my own parents, which is a shocking revelation. You know, as parents ourselves, you know, we act as my parents did to me, as the first and early mentors to our own children. If those early mentors are still a block to your fundamental and basic education, there's a big job to do. So I hope through working with organizations such as the BAT, the UK government, and with the renewed vigor and energy we have with FCDO, we'll be able to meet those obligations. Equally, I'd give you a practical example during the pandemic. Whilst the pandemic has been reigning, and we've both talked about the issues and challenges to budgets, when the Prime Minister himself returned from his serious illness caused by COVID-19, one of the first things he took charge of was hosting what was known as the Gavi Summit, a global summit sponsored by the UN on vaccinations. And there was a real sense of a common humanity, because the target we set ourselves of funds raised through international collaboration was in the region of about 7 billion. Well, we smashed the target. It went to about $8.5 billion. And what does that fund do? It ensures the vaccines, yes, for COVID-19, but also for other diseases which still, in places like Pakistan, Afghanistan, the issue of polio still exists. Is that we make sure, whether we're fighting COVID-19, polio, or malaria, that the most vulnerable communities have an opportunity to access vaccines. And I think that underlines again our commitment that the priorities on issues of alleviating human suffering remain very much heart and center of our thinking and our policy programming.
How deep do you think Britain's role should be in helping developing countries in distributing vaccines like that in a secure way?
Well, I think it's a partnership. Again, a very practical reflection, if I may. Many of you have been following, I'm sure, those listening in, about, as we all hope, that there are about 9 vaccines, including a British vaccine being produced at, researched at Oxford. There's about 9 which are in those final stages. And the vaccine at Oxford will be, the patent rights on that are with AstraZeneca, a British company. I'm actually proud of the fact that we helped facilitate, and I played a role with that, with a great institute in India. India, as we all know, is the pharmacy of the world. 60 or thereabout % of all pharmaceuticals are produced in India. Well, we've done a tie-up between AstraZeneca and the Serum Institute. Adar Poonawalla is the lead CEO there, in ensuring that as that vaccine comes into production, we already have the agreements in place which will allow for a large scaling up of production, the production of vaccines, and then, in answering your question, that the most vulnerable can be provided access to it. That doesn't mean that we're not ensuring that the British population will be provided for. They will be. But at the same time, that's a practical demonstration, I hope, of the question you asked me about our commitment to helping others. And that practical demonstration is doing what I believe it should be at the heart of any government, that if you are in a position where you are able to help others, then it's the core of what defines our common humanity. We should seek to do just that.
Before, we spent most of our time talking about the C word, COVID, coronavirus, which we spent most of our time talking about the B word, Brexit. And I'd like you to let us know your thoughts on how Brexit will impact Britain's relationship with South Asia. What will British foreign policy look like after Brexit?
Well, I think, you know, you're quite right. Before the C word, there was the B word. And going back 10 years, these are new words to our vocabulary. But there's a lighter side to this in terms of what Brexit would mean. I said to you just before we came on air, my youngest, Faris, is turning 6 today. Yet I reflect back at the time of the general election, and he was sitting in the kitchen at home. And he and I were just having a conversation, and he was munching away on his favorite snack. So I just started filming him because it's always amusing to capture those memories, and they remain with you. And I just said to him, you know, and I call him Farouk. his nickname is Faru. So I said, Faru, what does Daddy do? And he just smiled at me, and I said, is Daddy a doctor? He went, no. I said, is Daddy a teacher? No. And the professions went on. So then I looked at him and I said, Faru, what does Daddy do? And he said, Daddy's job is about getting Brexit done. So even for a then 5-year-old, there was this real recognition that Brexit was dominating our thinking. In terms of the practical question you asked me, I think Brexit does provide a huge opportunity for us to engage quite directly on our priorities alongside those of our South Asian partners in a manner that we have not been able to do so for many years. It allows us to build relationships, but also tackle issues of tariffs and barriers, and focus in on key sector development, which again, we will be in a far better and stronger place to do, because we can make those deals more quickly, in the sense that we're not having to reflect the needs of 28 countries, but actually 2 countries, primarily ourselves and the country we're dealing with. Now, this isn't without challenge, because there are established relationships which have existed with the European Union, of which Britain's been an important and intrinsic part. But equally, it doesn't mean we're turning our back on the European Union. We continue to have very strong alliances with the EU on various areas of work. You talked about the UN. We continue to collaborate with the likes of France as a P5 member, Germany as a current temporary member of the UN, on important issues of, resolving conflict, looking at the COVID-19 pandemic and meeting the challenges of climate change. But equally, because of Brexit, we will be now able to have much more open and candid discussions of bilateral nature with countries across South Asia, which will be focused on developing their sectors, and also looking quite positively at inward investment into the UK as well.
Are you already having those candid conversations? Yes,
we are. And we are having many, there's many free trade agreements, which my colleagues in the Department of International Trade have been leading on, which have already been signed. We're working. I know there is a lot of interest around our current discussions with the European Union. I remain an eternal optimist in terms of reaching an end conclusion which works for the European Union and works for the United Kingdom. And it is important, as we look at relationships around the world, and the COVID pandemic has demonstrated this, that we do come together and act collaboratively on meeting the major challenges that currently confront us. And therefore, I do hope that through not just the agreements we reach with our partners and friends across Europe through the European Union, but more so looking forward, that when we are establishing new horizons, that we're able to do so, and on a very different basis with the likes of emerging powers such as India, in a manner which we weren't able to do so before. And indeed, I've spent a fair bit of time recently having exactly those kind of discussions. So if I can give you again a practical example, I'm a businessman of 20 years, so I like practical examples on the issue specifically of climate change. India is a leading world power on solar energy. They've got the Solar Alliance. Obvious reasons, they get more sun than us anyway, but nevertheless, we're also leading the world on issues of offshore wind. It's how you can bring those collaborations together. So when we talk of a future energy mix, be it for India, the UK, or elsewhere in the world, which is less reliant on fossil fuels, such as coal, we can then leverage the expertise of India and in areas of solar, as well as ourselves on offshore wind, and really make that energy mix work for the kind of ambitions and challenges we're setting ourselves on meeting the targets around climate change.
You talked about collaboration. You, of course, deal with the region with a number of geopolitical sensitivities. How does the UK view India's border issue, for example, at the moment?
Well, the thing is, India is an important partner to us. And I think the challenges they have with their neighbours are primarily a bilateral matter for India to resolve, be it with China or with Pakistan. On a moment of personal reflection, I alluded to my own background. I have a lot of strong family history in India, and a lot of people and friends and family who are still very much part of the modern India. Equally, on my wife's side, she has a lot of friends and family still in Pakistan. And whilst like many South Asian communities, our families are now very global. There's a real sense, I feel, and I do hope that particularly when it comes to India and Pakistan, they can resolve their challenges when it comes to matters of border disputes in a bilateral manner, but also what they should focus in on, in my view, and I hope that we can play our part in strengthening inward and outward investment opportunities. If they were able to collaborate on issues of trade, the people-to-people link, restoring transport links, it would prove a phenomenal step forward, not just for India, for Pakistan, and for the region as a whole, but also in terms of attracting inward investment across the region. So I do hope that the countries, and India in particular, with some of the bilateral challenges it faces, it's of course a matter for India, but we look very ready and hope and will support whatever bilateral initiatives are taken by countries in the region towards an optimum outcome for all their communities. Because I think it's of benefit, as I said, not just to the region, but for key friends and partners such as the UK as well.
You say it's a bilateral issue, but you also mentioned support, and surely that support is sometimes a friendly word in an ear.
Well, I think the friendly word in an ear is, you know, if you see two friends who have a difficult situation, you say to them, sit down and sort it out. And I think that's what India and Pakistan need to do.
We've had a question in from Farouk, one of our attendees today. Lord Ahmed, what is the position of the UK in helping Bangladesh in resolving the Rohingya problem?
Yeah, I've been myself engaged on this agenda for 3 years now. And if I may, again, just reflecting time when Boris Johnson was Foreign Secretary, I remember having an early discussion with him as Foreign Secretary. And at that point, the UK's position was pretty neutral. We weren't publicly critical of the Myanmar authorities on their situation and how their dealings with the Rohingya. And it's a matter for public record. I mean, what we've seen happening with the Rohingya community in Myanmar is nothing short of ethnic cleansing. It's as simple as that. The human tragedy unfolding with the Rohingya community is apparent for all to see. I've had the opportunity to visit the Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. And I'll tell you, Sonali, you know, I've been to many a refugee camp in my role as a minister, but nothing has hit me so hard for all reasons than visiting the Cox's Bazar. The sheer scale of human suffering, when you see a young mother with a young child in a small shack of what resembles nothing, but to her is her home, and just above it, it's not water leaking, it's sewage leaking. And there's latrines scattered all over the place. And I do pay tribute to the Bangladeshi authorities for what they've done, but the scale isn't just about the recent issue about 200 or 300, it's over 1 million people. You know, when you go there, there's this expanse of human suffering you see unfold in front of you. And what has the UK done? Well, over the last 3 years, we're penholders at the UN Security Council. We talked about the UN earlier. And what we have done is move from what used to be a silent discussion. Now, within diplomatic circles, it is a major step forward when you start talking and briefing out publicly about a particularly sensitive issue. And we moved to, whilst we haven't been able to pass specific resolutions at the Security Council, because there are others on the Security Council who are able to block resolutions. We don't agree with it, but that would happen. But equally, we've had what are known as presidential statements, briefings out, and both at the UN Security Council in New York, as well as the Human Rights Council in Geneva, we've led the way on public condemnation of the treatment of the Rohingya. And we've also led the way on ensuring the safe, secure, and voluntary return, ultimately, of the Rohingya community back to Myanmar. We're far from that achievement of that objective, but Bangladesh has a pivotal role. The UK was also instrumental in opening up the corridors. Boris Johnson, as Foreign Secretary, actually visited Myanmar directly to see what was happening in Rakhine State, where many of these appalling level of ethnic cleansing took place, and saw quite directly. And it was that visit which, in my mind, was the pivotal moment where we became much more public in our outcry and indeed campaigning for the Rohingya community. And that also led to the first time the UN to gain access into Rakhine in Myanmar itself, and also MOUs, memorandums of understanding, to be signed between the UN and Myanmar, as well as the Myanmar government and the government of Bangladesh. Now, these are agreements. They act as the framework and the foundation. And there's several elements that should happen in this. One, yes, I've talked about the return, but it must be done on a voluntary, safe, secure, mandated fashion. And that's not move away from the fact the Rohingya are still not even recognized as citizens within Myanmar. Imagine living your whole life for several generations, not even having a fundamental right to citizenship. That must be addressed. But equally, those who have committed the most heinous of crimes must also be brought to account. And I'm hopeful through agreements that are reached, but also through the institutions we have for accountability and justice, such as the International Criminal Court, those who are perpetrators of crimes, who have committed the worst kind of crimes against another person, whether it's rape, torture, or murder, are fully held to account. So there's a lot of work still to be done. But 3 years on from where we were when I first became Minister at the Foreign Office, I think the UK's public position, the support we've given politically, we're the second biggest donor to Bangladesh when it comes to the support of the Rohingya, well over £250 million in recent years. I think, yes, we talked about development and support for the most vulnerable. That's another living, working example of what the British government, the new FCDO, continues to do for those who are suffering the most. And the Rohingya, sadly, are a tragic example of that human suffering here in this world of 2020.
There's so much we could talk about. Before I hand back to Richard to start wrapping things up, I wanted to ask you about your assessment of what the British Asian Trust contributes in the international development field and where you think the role of South Asian diaspora is in the region's development. What is the role of the diaspora?
Well, in a way, you're an inspiring example of it. Be inspired, get up and do something about it. I think we all have a role to play in our various professions, but also our experiences. We all have these people-to-people links. How can we actually leverage that to fully ensure that the opportunities which exist on taking people out of poverty, providing the opportunities through education. But where I think the BAT also has an important role is the next level, and I look forward to further discussions to see how we can align programs, is on the skills training element of how do you take, if I can use that example of that young girl in Pakistan, but that could be replicated to any country of South Asia. How do we take that young girl who's studying in a primary school looking to become a doctor? How do we ensure that the opportunities in terms of access exist, but also that she has the training support, she has the mentoring support, she has the financial support, the psychological support, but also the creation of the environment within a country that allows her and many millions and millions like her to be able to avail that opportunity. And I think the British Asian diaspora is enriched through its own experiences. My father was no different to many other an Asian story who arrived here with a couple of pounds, £5 in his pocket, and went and worked on the railways. You know, there was a joke once that, you know, every other British Asian had a father who became a bus driver. And I was asked the question, somewhat, I think, as a pointed question once, that was your father a bus driver? I smiled politely and said, no, actually, my father was a train guard. But what I'm saying is those early experiences of having very little, but being able to build your own life, provide for your family, ensure education empowered your own families. And within a generation, we now see British Asians in every sector, in every profession, excelling. I always joke that the litmus test is often cricket. And when you cast your eye over to the English cricket team, again, there's some very rich examples of success of the British Asian community. But why did that happen? Because the environment of our incredible country, which is the UK, was conducive to allowing that those who were willing to put in the effort, those who were willing to, through real sort of sweat and yes, tears as well, but put in the effort, those who were willing to educate, empower themselves, and then give back to the community, reflected on the success we see. It's for us now to take those success stories, and that's people, individuals, of which we all are living, working examples, to see how we can make that come into good effect across South Asia. And I look forward specifically with organizations such as the BAT to do so much more, because the outreach and networks of organizations such as the British Asian Trust are phenomenal. And we can't do it alone as a government to government. This is a all of society effort, and that's what it will require.
Lord Ahmed, thank you very much for your thoughts this afternoon. I think that's a very good note to hand back to Richard, the Chief Executive of the British Asian Trust.
Thanks, Sonali. Pleasure.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Sonali, Lord Ahmed. That was absolutely tremendous. So thank you both so much. Lord Ahmed, we really appreciate you finding the time for us today and for sharing your thoughts on so many issues. I now, above everything, I now know that the list of professions that British Asian parents aspire for their children to become is not only doctors, lawyers and entrepreneurs, but it includes somebody who will get Brexit done. I know that later today you've got to make sure you have a good birthday party with your 6-year-old, and we wish them happy birthday and all the very best today. It was especially good to hear your thoughts on the new Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and the commitment to poverty and the poverty agenda. As I think you know, we at the British Asian Trust, we're really optimistic about this new government department. We think that the bringing together of the FCDO and DFID really presents some fantastic opportunities, and we're especially keen to keep working with the government as we take those agendas forward. And we'd be very keen to pick up the discussion with you, as you just mentioned, about the importance of skills training and skills development. That's a huge priority for us as well, and we'd be very keen to work with the government on that and see how we can bring together our supporters with our own skills with the government to make a real difference there in that post-COVID world. Sonali, thank you ever so much to you. You're always such a great supporter of the organisation, a great ambassador, and it's always a real pleasure to involve you in our event. So thank you very much as well. Thank you very much to everybody else who's joined us today. I know how busy you all are, and at BAT we're all truly grateful for your time and support. Please do look out for our future events. We try and keep you all informed of these. We've got this rolling programme of high-level webinars. This BAT Insight series will keep you informed. Look out for them, and please do your best to take part where you can. And obviously, if you have any suggestions of things that we could do in those insight sessions, then please don't hesitate to let us know, and my colleagues and I will do our best to cover any of those issues. So thank you all once again. Thank you very much, especially to Lord Ahmed and to Sonali. Thank you very much indeed, and I hope you have a good afternoon and evening.